podcast. We're gonna ramble on about movies and books and television and film festivals and directors and all this other stuff that I really know nothing about because they made this really long list of things that they want to talk about and I can't even read through all of them, but it's gonna be great. Okay, start the show.
Hello, and welcome to the Daily Planet podcast, your daily dose of movies, TV, books, and anything else we feel like talking about. My name is Scott Daly, editor-in-chief of dailyplanetfilms.com, and I'm joined as always by my co-host and co-editor, Matt Freeman. Matt, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm looking forward to talking about Damien Lindelof and his satanic creation, Lost.
Satanic creation. We've got a really good one for you guys tonight. We're going to talk about Lost. It's been about 5 years since Lost has come off the air, and we were talking about it the other day, and we decided it would be a good thing to discuss, kind of a 5 years later type of retrospective, if you will. Joining us on this journey into the terribleness that is Lost, we have my good friend, Chad Acevedo. Chad, how's it going?
Doing good. Ready to defend Damon in all his many facets of Lost.
So I guess that's a good point. The reason we brought Chad in is because Chad really likes Lost. Chad also really likes Christopher Nolan, so he didn't like our podcast about Nolan.
I wouldn't say I didn't like your podcast. I had some slight... I would say I slightly disagreed with your conclusion.
Just slightly.
Yeah, The Dark Knight's perfect. Whatever.
Okay. All right. See, that's why we brought Chad on, because it's going to be a really great discussion.
It's good to have different opinions, and ultimately we control the podcast, so we can end it with whatever opinion we want.
We will get the last word in. So, So you're setting yourself up to lose already.
Yeah, I assumed as much.
All right. But before we get into Lost, we wanted to go over some Daily Planet news. First, the first news item is related to our website. That this podcast is officially on iTunes. It's also on Android, right, Matt?
Yes, should be. Yeah.
So if you have an iPhone or iTunes or whatever, you can subscribe. You can search through there and subscribe, and anytime we release a new episode, it'll be there. If you are listening on iTunes, please rate us, please subscribe, send reviews, share it, do whatever you can to get us out there. We're hoping to use iTunes to get a larger audience, so if you could please do that, we would really appreciate it. Thanks to Matt for all the hard work and figuring out all that mess. Some coding and some dealing with Apple on their requirements.
No problem, Scott. It's all fun.
All right. The next thing I wanted to talk about was some movie news. The first item, unfortunately a depressing one, is about the Die Hard series. Last week, I think it was about midweek, it was announced that there's going to be a new Die Hard movie, which is already a bad idea. And this Die Hard movie is going to be a prequel, the origin story of John McClane. What do you guys think about this? Chad, what's your opinion on this?
It's tough to really come to like a concise thought. Thinking about this, it mostly makes me sad. Like I understand guys got to get a paycheck, but Bruce Willis should say no by this point.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming it's going to be Bruce Willis.
So since it's a prequel. So from what I understand, it's going to have a rapper on the beginning and end with old Bruce Willis, but he's going to be reminiscing about the times in his youth. So he'll be played by another person.
Okay.
So it almost seems like they wanted to get Bruce Willis back for another movie, but he was only available for like 2 weeks. So they came up with this rapper idea to still do it.
Pre and post.
Yeah. It's a terrible idea. And it's a terrible idea on so many levels. I don't know how you guys feel about the latest two movies. I didn't like either of them at all.
It's very similar to the original, like the original trilogy. Like originally there was only 3 Star Wars to me until hopefully this next trilogy is going to be great. But there's Die Hard, Die Harder, and Die Hard with a Vengeance for me.
Yeah.
They stop after that.
Well, and that's the thing about doing a prequel, because as much as those later 2 movies sucked, you could pretend like they didn't exist, right? They live in a completely different world.
Yeah.
But if you do a prequel and you have John McClane being John McClane before the original Die Hard, it kind of ruins the movie, because the whole thing was he's this regular beat cop thrown into a situation he's never experienced before. He's supposed to be a regular guy conquering this ridiculous adversary in Nakatomi Tower or whatever.
Yeah.
So if you have him go through all this other stuff beforehand where he did a similar thing with terrorists, which of course they're going to make the beats as similar as possible because that's how they write these movies.
Yeah, it's like there's some force that causes all franchises to eventually become the same thing, where it's just like some commando dude who's, you know, just a total badass and he kills everybody and has no emotions. I mean, that's what everything gradually becomes. Every action franchise I can think of, they just keep making sequels until the main character is Rambo.
Yeah. And you know they're going to put stupid callbacks in there. Like, I bet he says yippee-ki-yay to someone for some stupid reason that doesn't make sense. I bet we see him buying, like, undershirts, like the tank top undershirts.
Just A-frame tongue.
It's going to be... So,
maybe it'll be great.
No, but
No.
It's not going to be great.
No,
Let's be honest.
It'll be awful.
Well, but it'll be awful.
I wouldn't even go see it.
Yeah, and that's what I don't think I'm going to, because I think it has like potential to ruin Die Hard for me. Like, every time I watch Die Hard after seeing that movie, you think about it with this new stupid prequel perspective in mind, and I don't want to. So, like, I think boycotting movies is kind of dumb in general, but in this case, I think it makes sense just for your own personal enjoyment of another movie in the franchise. And
Yeah.
the craziest thing about all this is the Twitter reaction to this was so terrible. Like, like, who in the studio thinks this is a good idea? I think that, I forget, and I'm blanking on the name of the guy who's making the movie, but he tweeted out a tweet basically announcing it, and every response was negative on this thing. Like, I think they're still going to go ahead with it. I mean, that's what Hollywood does, but how can they think this is a good idea?
I think it's just purely marketing. It's like they own this intellectual property where they can make a movie with, you know, where the beginning of the title is Die Hard : and their accounting marketing people are like, this is guaranteed to get at least $74.3 million in revenue. So if we just make this movie really cheaply, which means we barely have Bruce Willis in it, then we'll break even, and that's all that matters. We don't have to keep up our reputation as a studio. We don't have to make a good movie. We just need to break even. That's really important thing when you're making art, is breaking even.
Yeah, and that's true. And I sometimes I tend to forget I kind of exist in a bubble of people that care a lot about movies and movie news. The vast majority of people that are going to be going to this film aren't following people on Twitter that would be announcing the film. They're just going to be people sitting in a theater saying, "Oh, a new Die Hard, that looks cool."
Yeah, right. I mean, I can get all critical, but like when I was in college, I was probably just like exactly the person who would have been like, "Oh, sweet, Die Hard," and then gone and seen it and been like, "That was awesome," even if it was terrible, you know, because I had no discernment.
Yeah, I mean, that's like, I think that's, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's most people that see movies. Like, my type of movie person is a very low percentage of people that like to see and analyze and discuss the news and all this. So from their perspective, I'm sure they're banking on those regular moviegoers that just say, Die Hard is cool, the last one was cool, I want to see this one. And it's cheaper than making a movie with a new franchise because you don't have to market it as much. People know the name already.
Yeah.
It's sad, though. They shouldn't do it, but they're gonna.
Yep.
All right. Moving on, the next bit of news I wanted to talk about. I don't know if you guys have ever read the book Ready Player One. I think, Matt, you said you have.
Yeah,
Chad,
I read it.
have you?
I have not.
So this is I guess I've heard it described as people that play those MMORPG games, like the book for them, because it's basically a virtual world that exists inside like an MMO type of environment. Well, Steven Spielberg is directing the movie based on this, that's really kind of old news. The news that I saw is Ready Player One is a book that is obsessed with the 80s and references to old movies and pop culture of the 80s. So Steven Spielberg movies are referenced a lot in the book. He's going to just take all references to himself out of the film, which, I mean, I guess it's smart because it's awkward to be making a movie about when people are talking about you. But
I guess, but it's like, why would he want to make that movie in the first place then? Like, because he's undeniably like the source of a huge amount of pop culture. So
yeah, that's a valid question, and that's actually why I wanted to bring this up in the first place. I didn't love the book. I think the 80s nostalgia trip, like, I don't know, it just, like, people seem to be, like, the big thing is obsession with, like, the old retro 80s music and video games, and, like, that's, I know it's not all the book is, but so much of it is just, like, if you grew up in the 80s, like, it's just name-dropping movies, and, like, there's a part of the book where the game the player has to play is, like, recite war games, like, word for word, and because the character's so obsessed with the 80s, he knows the entire movie just word for word, and that's what he does. And it's like, it's an interesting property for Spielberg to catch on to, and then, like you said, to not only latch onto it but then cut himself out of it is interesting. Mm-hmm. But I'm sure he'll make it good because he's Steven Spielberg, and that's what he does.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it'll be a fun movie. I enjoyed the book. I agree with your criticisms, though.
All right. The last bit of news we had, in case you're living under a rock, there was a new Star Wars trailer that was dropped yesterday. I just wanted to talk about this, and I wrote about it a little today, but in reference to the fact that we still don't know anything about this movie. And this is it. I mean, like, I saw an article on this, and I agreed with it, that this trailer seemed like more of a teaser than a trailer, and this is the final trailer. It was cut like a teaser. It, like, all the pacing was like a teaser. It didn't really reveal anything, and it seemed like to me it seemed like Disney didn't even really want to do a trailer. And honestly, the reason is because they don't have to, right? I mean, everyone's going to see this movie, so that, like, this could have been the first movie that just didn't need to market itself at all.
Well, it could be that they don't have to, but it could also just be the J.J. Abrams mystery box.
Yeah. It seems like he doesn't like to give much away. I mean,
he does not.
Which I appreciate that. I mean, I really love trailers, but I hate how much they give away. So I end up watching them 5 times. I figured out the movie by the 5th time, and still go see it and still pay $18 for a seat. So I do appreciate that. It just gets me excited. I mean, and like you said, I'm going to see it no matter what. It's like it could have looked terrible, and I'd go see it.
Yeah, so, I think there's a happy medium, though. I think there's between giving away too much and not showing anything. And so while I enjoyed the trailer, there's really nothing. I mean, there's nothing gained from it. I mean, it looks fun. I really liked the fact that for some reason, even though only 30 years have passed, everyone seems to have forgotten about what Jedi are and what the dark side is, and like, so it's 30 years from the end of the first trilogy, which makes it like 65 from the end of the second trilogy, or the I guess the original 1, 2, and 3, when, like, there were thousands of Jedi and everyone knew what they were. Like, because people have really bad memory in the Star Wars universe. Yeah.
I mean, what's funny to me is that I'm not that huge of a Star Wars expanded universe fan, but, like, the fact that they wrote countless novels and comic books set in the Star Wars universe after the movies, and now this movie is basically saying none of that happened. There weren't any Jedi or Sith anymore. We're just erasing all that.
Yeah,
I think that's a pretty funny. I mean, and that's how you have to do it, I guess. But
well, there's just so much of it out there that they just wanted a clean slate, and they're already gonna. I mean, their universe is gonna eventually be huge anyway because they're already releasing new books that they're calling canon now, and the same thing's gonna happen again. But they just wanted fresh start.
Yeah, I guess. I unfortunately am going to go on record saying that I don't expect this movie to be very good, but I'm hoping that it is.
I expect it to make $3 billion.
That's probably
it's
good.
It's on recording. Now you know. So when I'm right, you can all tell me I was right. but this is gonna be the first movie to break $3 billion.
I think you're probably right. I'm just saying it's not going to be that good. I'm not saying it's not going to make a lot of money.
Yeah, I mean, I hope it is. But the bar is so low, I don't even think it has to be, like, great. It just has to be not bad.
Yeah.
And people will be nuts.
Yeah.
But so the thing is, we're going to get one of these new movies every year, right? And, like, this kind of excitement, I mean, people are still going to be excited to see the movies, but the excitement to the level we're seeing now is not going to exist in a few years, because it'll be just like the new Marvel movie coming out. It'll just be the new Star Wars movie coming out. I mean, people are excited, but like opening weekend seats are basically sold out at a lot of theaters. That's not like a couple years from now. That's not going to happen anymore. It'll just be
really
the
good
new
point.
Star Wars movie.
Because when they started making Marvel movies, I was legitimately excited. I was like, oh, they're finally gonna show these kind of superhero images on the big screen, and that's exciting to me. And now, like, fairly quickly into that process, I'm just totally bored of it. So yeah, it's like how many times you need to see a lightsaber before you just go like, yeah, that's that again.
I mean, I still get excited for those movies, but it's a different level of excitement. It's, yeah, I get to see this again. I'm probably going to go see this weekend versus I want to see this right away. I mean, I don't buy advance tickets for any movie, basically, and I bought advance tickets for Star Wars 2 months in advance. So
yeah,
it won't be that way once you start knocking them out once a year. But anyway, let's get moving on, because we're wasting time here. So do we want to real quick do our things we've seen in the past week, just to talk about them? Chad, you can go ahead and go first, since you're our very special guest.
Yeah, I actually saw Steve Jobs on Sunday. It was very good. You know, I like kind of all the pieces I was excited about, because I love Sorkin. I love some of the work that he's done. It's even people haven't loved, I've enjoyed. I love The Newsroom. I think I've watched the entire West Wing from start to finish 3 times, because I really like his writing style. Like it's very unrealistic. I'm not nearly that. I guess I wish I spoke like his characters. But Fassbender's amazing. You know, I didn't realize he was on screen until the end, basically constantly, except for maybe a few 30-second minute gaps. But it's just him, and he really controls everything about the movie. It was shot really well. I think he did it. He did each kind of, the movie's broken up into 3 product launches. It's the original Macintosh, I think it's called the Cube. It's whatever. One of those huge failures.
That Next company,
Cube. Yeah. And then in 1998, the actual Mac, the iMac, that really turned him from a kind of consistent failure to a success. But they shot the original from 1984 on a 16 millimeter film, the 88 on a 35 millimeter film, and then the 1998 section on a HD, or I think it was a high definition digital camera. And it's if you didn't pay attention, you wouldn't notice. You really can see the 16, but the 35 and HD don't seem hugely different. But I think going back and rewatching it, that's one of those little details that people will really, really like.
Yeah, that's really cool, and that's something that, I mean, when the film started, I noticed it was grainy, but I just kind of said to myself, "Oh, that's really grainy," and then that kind of went out of my mind, and I didn't think about it anymore from that point on. But I mean, that's really cool that they did it that way. I mean, it definitely separates them in the 3 distinct areas of the film, which and I saw this movie too, and I agree with you. It's really good. I think Fassbender's probably gonna get an Oscar nomination. I don't know if he'll win it.
He definitely will.
But he'll definitely be nominated. I mean, he doesn't look like Jobs at all, but his performance is transcendent.
Yeah. Speaking of that, I read some criticism. I haven't seen it, but I'm excited about it. I read some criticism that it wasn't realistic. Like it didn't reflect reality well, and I thought that was funny, because I'm like, if it's a Sorkin script, I don't care if it reflects reality well.
Right. Did anyone go into a Sorkin and Danny Boyle movie expecting it to reflect reality? I mean, it hits the big beats, and it dramatically enhances everything else it needs to, just like any based on a true story movie does. I don't like this. Anytime we do a movie based on a true story, there's always people that are writing these. This wasn't historically accurate. articles or complaints, and you're watching a film. Like, you're watching a narrative. They're going to do, if you want to see exact truth, watch a documentary. And even then, it's not the full truth because you're only seeing what the director wants to show you. So
yeah, absolutely. And it's probably 80% one-on-one conversations behind closed doors.
Right.
So I don't know what someone can expect.
Yeah, how is that ever going to be historically accurate? You don't even know what happened there.
Yeah.
Well, cool.
It was really impressive that they could do most of the conversations were between Steve Jobs and software engineers, and then a CEO and a chief marketing officer, and still find a movie that felt kinetic.
Yeah,
so it says a lot for Danny Boyle.
Yeah, for sure. And Matt, I think you need to see this because I think it maybe not necessarily perfectly ties in, but your Whiplash piece from a couple weeks ago about great people usually being assholes, it kind of ties in well to that.
I'm obsessed with that. Yeah,
because the movie really doesn't. It tries to. I mean, it definitely paints him as being a jerk of a person, but also paints him as a very intelligent, smart, hardworking person. So it doesn't really want to take sides, but I think it definitely shows that he wasn't really a good person.
Yeah, well, I'll have to watch it and then write another article and continue my defending psychopaths article series.
Absolutely, please do. Matt, what was your thing?
I didn't really see anything in the last week that was worth commenting on. So,
all right. The thing I wanted to talk about real quickly here, because we're wasting time. We're already half an hour into this. I saw a documentary called Meet the Patels, which is it's by an actor in Hollywood, Ravi Patel, and his sister, who I believe is a filmmaker. Basically, he breaks up with his 2-year girlfriend because she's not Indian, and he wants to kind of find a woman. He basically kept this relationship secret from his parents for 2 years because they're like, he's first generation American, and so he ends up breaking up with her and decides, I'm going to let my parents do their matchmaking process. Not an arranged marriage, but like in the Indian culture, there's like they have these data sheets that like are basically resumes for people that families pass around, and so the documentary kind of chronicles his journey through this entire process. It's really funny. It's kind of really enlightening to the culture that I really wasn't very familiar with, and how everything works, and the traditions, and it's because it's from his perspective as a person in that family. Like when it's poking fun of some of the lighter sides of it, it never feels mean or anything. It's not insulting traditions or anything, but it's just a very kind of personal and revealing look into this whole matchmaking dating process. So I don't know. It was at Angelica here in Dallas. I don't know if it's anywhere else or where it'll be. It feels like the type of thing that will eventually end up on Netflix, though, pretty quickly.
Yeah, I would really want to see that. I mean, I'm fascinated with that kind of thing. I mean, I don't think our culture does matchmaking particularly well in any sense. So I'm always interested in how other cultures have solved that problem.
Yeah, and they've got it down. They have this, like, so I guess the whole thing is there's the Patel family is a certain kind of Indian, and they're like, if you have the last name Patel, which is one of the most common last names, you're basically part of this, like, the world's biggest family. Mm-hmm. So, like, they have literally a Patel dating convention, or I guess it's called a marriage convention because you're looking for a wife, where just like thousands of Patels from around the world go to this convention center and just do like speed dating stuff for the entire weekend or something. Like the stuff that they do is crazy. Like it's so well organized, and
mm-hmm.
But no, it's a very well done documentary.
Yeah, cool. I'll watch that one.
All right, so let's move on to the main event. Let's talk about Lost. So, I think, Matt, that this whole thing, basically you and I got together last week and we're talking about what we wanted to discuss next, and I forget exactly how the subject of Lost got breached, but as soon as it did, we both started talking about our opinions on it, the legacy of it. It's been 5 years since the show went off the air, and the show kind of landed and started and finished in this weird kind of transition time in television, where things were starting to move from the old way of network TV, 24, 25 episode seasons that are only on network TV, to this kind of weird different model we have now and we exist in now. So it's an exciting thing to talk about, just both in its impact and just to dissect the show itself, because it's one of those shows that is detailed and complicated and as it turns out, not very good.
Yeah, I'm fixing to tear into it, but I definitely want to acknowledge, the good things it does, and like the production values. I remember at the time just being blown away that this was a TV show, and they were showing the plane crash in the first episode, and it's just a consistently well done movie in what movie. I said it again. Show on what I would call like a micro sense, in that like any scene that you're watching, you will think is really good. The way I phrased it earlier was like if a person not familiar with the show walked into the room while it was playing, they would almost immediately be hooked, because interesting things are happening on the screen. It's well shot. It looks nice. There's interesting characters. It's only when you try to string the show together that you begin to see the flaws. I guess I'll pass it back to you, Scott.
Right. Yeah. And just so before we dive into this, just a refresher for those of you, if you haven't seen Lost, there are going to be spoilers. If you haven't seen Lost, I don't know how much you're going to get out of this conversation. I mean, surely there'll be some benefit to glean from it, but mostly diving into a show that if you haven't seen, you might not enjoy. But Lost is a show basically about a group of 40 people that are on a plane, and the plane crashes on the island. It starts out kind of as just a typical, castaway type story where people trying to survive on an island, and then weird things keep happening. There's these others that are on the island that keep kidnapping people and taking them away, and this weird monster that turns out to be this smoke monster, and things from there spiral more and more into the sci-fi realm. The show came out, originally premiered in 2004, which, like I was saying earlier, was right about the time I think TiVo was out in 2004, but it wasn't widely adopted yet. So this is really one of the last shows, like event shows, that people would all watch live and talk about the next morning. We still kind of have some of those, like Game of Thrones. People usually watch that around the release time, but no one really watches shows all at the exact same moment anymore, because we all are DVRing everything. Mm-hmm. It was, like I said, one of the last shows that was a show like this that also did a full 24 episode 1 hour season, and we'll get into that a little more as we go on. It was a show that in the middle of it, the writer's strike happened, so they had to work around that, and there was a long hiatus in the middle of one of the seasons. And then they ended up only having time after they came back for 5 episodes. So if you look at the run of the season, the first 3 seasons, I think, have 20-something episodes. The next have 18 or something. And I think the last one only has like 12 or something. So they kind of... TV changed as the show was running, and the show kind of followed that change. So I mean, that's the background of Lost. I guess, Chad, what's your, overall feelings on Lost before we make fun of the show that you like so much?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first off, for anyone who hasn't seen the show, stop, call into work for the next week and watch the show. It's I mean, if this existed now, or anyone hasn't seen it, it's the ideal show to binge through, because it really is. It's cliffhanger after cliffhanger. Regarding flaws, were there some narrative issues? Maybe some writing issues. Yeah, there's some missteps, but I think considering 118 episodes, roughly, I think 85 to 90 hours of network television, 20, I'd say probably there's between 10 and 30 major characters, depending on when you want to stop saying someone's major. I think there's a lot more positive than negative throughout the show. There's a lot of great things about it. When there are some issues with it, I'll be the first to admit, but I would say it's technically very good. I guess that's my same argument for Christopher Nolan. There's some technical pieces he's fantastic at, just some writing issues.
And I don't think anyone's going to disagree with that. Full disclosure, I have not watched Lost front to back since it aired. In preparation for this, since we just decided to do it last week, I watched as many episodes as I could, tried to get in all the big ones. I watched the pilot, I watched the series finale, and I watched some of the premieres and finales on the seasons in between. But I did basically spend a day on Wikipedia, like reading every episode summary and every piece of information I get. So I do know what I'm talking about. I just haven't seen the show front to back since its original run. I agree with what Matt said. The pilot in particular is incredible. I think it's still, maybe Game of Thrones surpassed it, but at the time it was the most expensive pilot ever produced. It's basically a 2-hour movie. It's so well done. It's really well planned. It's really well shot. As the pilot was playing, I kept saying, wow, that's a great shot right there. That's a great shot right there. And that's because, technically J.J. Abrams is a really good director. And I don't know how many other episodes he directed. I think this might have been the only one, the pilot. Maybe I'm wrong, but
yeah, he didn't do much. I think it was one, maybe two.
Yeah. But here's the thing about Lost, and here's when I'm going to unleash Matt on everyone. Lost is a show that is really great while you're watching it. You enjoy the acting, the scenes, the characters, but it's a show that once it's showed its full hand, it just breaks down, and the writing falls into a level of basically awfulness. And Matt, I will let you go. And
yeah, so I can very succinctly sum up my problem with this show, which is that it'll for me it'll always be the touchstone of what happens when you don't plan out your story ahead of time. That's the context that I reference it all the time. Like, I think there's even a previous podcast where I'm like, and then it ended up like Lost. And what I mean is, it went completely off the rails because the writers didn't know where they were supposed to be taking things, and then they sort of panicked and made stupid choices, and then had to deal with the consequences of those choices. And because you're writing basically a serial, a television show, which is serial fiction by definition, it just sort of snowballs. And if you don't know where you're going, if you don't know where all the character arcs are going, then you're just going to end up with a train wreck. I would argue the only thing you need to know when you're writing serial fiction is you need to know what each of the characters' arcs are, at least in the broad details. You don't need to know exactly what they do and who they interact with and whatever, but you need to know what their conflict is, and you need to know how it's resolved. And I don't think they even had that much for this show. I think there are so many characters, and it's almost from week to week it feels like whatever's happening to them is just some interesting dramatic situation that the writers just thought of that week and decided, like, okay, that's the most dramatic thing that we have this week, so we're going to put that in there with no consideration to whether it made sense in the overall plot of that character, and certainly in the overall plot of the story. I'm going to let somebody else talk, even though I'm not done.
No, to be the mediator in this, I completely agree with you. But to give credit to the writers in this, I agree that they didn't have everything planned out, but it was also like, even if you come up with a plan, like, you want to plan for the show into the future, right? So you don't want to write something that ends after one season. You don't want to write something that the show ends after 2 seasons. I think the show got so popular and the network was requiring them to stretch it out so much that if they did have a plan, it basically got tossed out the window and they had to change everything.
That's one of the reasons I brought through is 85 to 90 hours of network television. Like, it's not an AMC where they get creative license. They had to, like you said, they have to keep selling the hours for commercials. This was back when people still watched commercials. It's honestly the last show that I watched, I think, every Wednesday, no matter what was going on. going downstairs to watch TV at 8 o'clock.
Which is one of the things I brought up to Matt earlier in the week when we were talking about this is, can you imagine how much better of a show this would have been if it came out today, in a world that 10-episode seasons are perfectly acceptable? Like it would have been able to just take everything and tighten it up and remove all the fluff, because there's a lot of fluff in this show, and they would have been able to focus. And a show like Breaking Bad didn't exist, where even if it was at its most popular, the creator was allowed to say, look, this is where my show ends and I'm going to end it here. And tough. The world didn't exist like that in the time of Lost. So, I mean, while I do think that the writing is not good, and we'll dive into that even further here in a bit, I think it's also a lot of the problems with the show I have looking at it today are a result of that kind of network television world that existed at the time.
Yeah, I mean, I say maybe. You know, I can grant you that maybe if Lost were made today and they had 10 episode seasons and, you know, they had the budget and the amount of focus, it might have worked. But my real problem with Lost, which I stated at the very beginning of the podcast, is actually Damon Lindelof.
Yeah, if he was still writing it.
Because I think he ruins everything he touches. And I'm going to name the 3 biggest movies that he's been involved with: Cowboys and Aliens, Prometheus, and Star Trek Into Darkness. And if you are a movie watcher, you already sort of are familiar with these movies, and you know that these movies all have the same problems fundamentally, which is that they're all actually very beautiful to watch. They all have very sort of dramatic, sweeping character moments, and none of them make any sense when you think about them for more than 5 minutes. And that's the thing about Lost, is that I think if Damien Lindelof was writing it, even in a perfect world, I don't think he's good at narrative. Like it's funny, we were talking about I forget who we were talking about, but like some people are really good at writing dialogue, some people are really good at writing narrative, some people are really good at everything. He's actually, assuming he's actually the one writing the dialogue, he is really good at dialogue, I'll admit that. He's really good at like crafting little tiny dramatic scenes of conflict, but he has no idea how to connect like an overarching story structure with acts.
Right. Yeah. And it's frustrating because I think he has good ideas, right? I mean, like, if you look at the ideas of this show from a high level, with the exception of a few, they're overall pretty. I mean, so if we break Lost down to its simplest, which is to say, this is a story about people who are quite literally lost on an island, but also lost in life. They're people that don't really have a reason to exist. They are looking for motivation in their life. They don't know what to do. They're lost. So, I mean, taking that and juxtaposing it with them being trapped on this island and forced to coexist with all these other people in a very similar position is a very good idea.
It's a good framing.
Yeah,
but it's not a story, is
right.
the thing.
Absolutely.
A story is, you know, a young man discovers that his destiny is to be a Jedi, and he goes off, and, you know, like that's a good framing, but that could go in infinity different directions. So yeah, like I guess I see your point that he has good science fiction sort of instincts, but I don't think he executes them well at all.
Well, yeah, and I love science fiction, but the more sci-fi this show got, the worse it got, in my opinion. And
the shift from mystery to sci-fi, definitely, that was a weakness for it. Mm-hmm. I'll admit that. But to defend Lindelof, I think he does write. If he didn't write well, I don't think the characters would have been as strong, which is the strongest, in my opinion, you know, characteristic of the show is, by the end, you care about half the people on the show. Like, you legitimately care about them. I know when I was writing down notes, one thing I wrote was episodes that made me weep, and there's 3 to 4 note times in there. Like, legitimately, by the time the show was ended in the last season, I cried a few times because Jen and Son, that's heartbreaking. And if it wouldn't be that way if there wasn't decent writing. Granted, it's on a magical island that hops through time, so expecting a clear narrative is a lot to ask for.
Right. So I agree with that, and that's gets to my fundamental issue, which I think kind of mirrors Matt's. Lost is a show that, to back up, I'm okay with unanswered questions. I'm okay with vague mystery and vague sci-fi, Deus Ex Machinas, whatever. But only if you construct a story in which that stuff doesn't really matter. The problem with the story of Lost is that from the beginning it was set up to be this story where the characters are important, yes, but the mystery is also important. Why they're here, what is going on here, the specifics of what the island is was set up to be one of the most central through lines of the narrative. And when you make something like that and then you blow it, which, I mean, it's my opinion, but they blew it. Nothing connects. Nothing really makes sense. Then everything falls apart.
Yeah. They basically ended by saying, we don't know how to end this, so everyone's dead and in purgatory. And I know you can debate whether that's the correct interpretation, but there's no other way of interpreting it that doesn't require bending over backwards. So that's how I choose to interpret it.
Well, the flash sideways in the final season, those basically the purgatory was after all the events had already happened, and that's right. The flash sideways are effectively kind of like when someone dies, it's the last thing they see when they die. Mm-hmm. So they're kind of going through and cleaning it up.
But the only reason those existed was because they wanted to throw people off. The flash sideways don't narratively tie to anything else that they were trying to do. The whole battle between Jacob and the Man in Black have nothing to do with these sideways flashes at all, except to say, well, these people were really connected with each other in life, so when they died, they created this place where they could all hang out prior to moving on to the next life or whatever. So it doesn't make any sense, and it was kind of shoehorned in there so they could throw in this confusing flash sideways where people throughout the entire season are going, what's going on here? What is this? I mean, that has to be, I can't tie them into the main plot line at all. And that's, Matt, I was sitting with you today on GChat. I was trying to lay out the plot of this movie in the simplest terms, like a through line and I couldn't do it. I had to give up. Yeah. And we could try to do it right now. I mean, we got three of us here. We're all smart people. We could try to do it. But the fact is, to me, that it doesn't tie together. Because sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I don't want to put Chad on the spot, but I'd be interested if, what his impression of the point of the show or the summary of the show is, because, and I'm not, the reason I ask is, I just tend to focus on the things I focus on, and that causes me to not like it. But if Chad is focusing on something else, and the show is doing that thing well for him, then great. I don't argue that he should like it on his own terms. So.
I think definitely. I mean, there were in that final to finish up my thought on the what I would describe as it was an epilogue. Mm-hmm. It had broken up throughout the final season. I think the point of the show. I mean, God, I don't know. That they think there was a lot. I think they may have spread. They're a bit spread too thin on what they were trying to write about. I don't know. You may have stumped me, man.
That's not really a fair question. I just wondered if maybe you had it on the tip of your tongue for whatever reason. But I have right here what Lindelof actually says his one sentence description is, and what he says is, damaged people crash on damaged island, people fix each other, then island, all consumed in bright light, yay or boo. That's the quote.
Wow.
And my reaction
I
to that
saw
is,
you wrote that. I didn't know that was his quote. That's awful.
That's his tweet. That's his one tweet explanation of the plot. And I'm like, First of all, they don't fix each other. Like, so many of them just die for no reason. Like Faraday and Locke, who are like characters you actually really like, they just die for no reason, and it's never like contextualized. It's just completely sad and depressing. We don't understand how the island works or what it is, so I don't see how they fix the island. And them being consumed in bright light is basically just the same as Stephen King killing everyone with a bomb at the end of. He put himself into a corner. You know, it's lazy. So,
and to piggyback onto your Stephen King thing, because I know Chad loves Stephen King and he's ready to jump down your throat about talking about it with Stephen King. But the thing with Stephen King is, I think Stephen King always made it very clear that the journey was the most important part, and that the ending really wasn't that important. So when Stephen King wrote a shitty ending, which he did many times, it didn't matter because the rest of it was so important. But Lost isn't like that. Lost isn't written like that. It's written like a story whose ending, that the central conceit is everything. And so when you don't stick that landing, it kind of ruins it. And I mean, and that quote that you said, that none of that actually happened. And to talk back, I mean, the whole central theme, besides people being lost, that was set up even from the pilot, was good versus evil, right? I mean, there's that scene in the pilot where they're playing backgammon, and you know, two sides, one dark, one light, and that's what they established from the very beginning. Mm-hmm. But our light side and our dark side, being Jacob and the Man in Black, are never really defined. The stakes are defined really vaguely. It's just the island keeps badness from coming out, and therefore they have to stop the badness from getting out. We don't know what the badness is. Yeah. And frankly, both Jacob and the Man in Black basically did very similar things. So there's not even really a clear divide between what is good and what is bad. So just to make your whole thing hinging on a MacGuffin of bad stuff is bad, can't get out because then the light would go out, is not good storytelling.
Right. It's like Jacob wears white and the Man in Black, and he turns into a black smoke monster, and therefore Jacob is good and he's evil. It's like, well, wait a minute. I mean, good and evil are complicated things, and no one even really knows the answer to these questions. You know, and okay, fine. If you want to explore the theme of good and evil, then let's explore the theme of good and evil. But the show doesn't explore the theme. It just says by fiat that this guy is good and this guy is evil.
Yeah, you have to define what good and evil mean. And if we look, the only real clear indicator of that is the Man in Black for what evil is. And what does he do? He manipulates people. He kills people. He tries to get people to do what he wants. Who else does that? Like every other character on this show, including Jacob, who's supposed to be the good guy.
Yeah, it does seem like that. I mean, they definitely didn't want black and white, because all the characters are all very gray. Like Saeed's gray, Jack's gray. I mean, Sawyer, Kate, everyone. I mean, half are criminals. They're on the run. You know, they're all having major issues. So I don't think they were looking for black and white, or at least until they introduced those two characters, which never really, that felt like one of the kind of last minute add-ins, trying to add in a season.
See, but that's what I think it felt like, a last minute add-in. But then I looked back at everything else, and like I said, in the pilot, they do that scene that's very explicit. They build it as a moment. It's shot as an important moment where Locke is talking about the fight between black and white. I mean, it's in the context of a board game with a kid, but I mean the metaphor is there, and it's established early, and it's reestablished throughout the show at various points. So I think how it was executed, you're right, wasn't planned and they had to change, but I think that was always something they wanted to explore, and I think the kind of, maybe, and I'm trying to interpret the show as best as I can, you bring these damaged people that live in that gray world, and they each want to prove that they can make those people be one or the other, right? Like, so these people exist in gray, but Jacob thinks they're they're still good people, whereas the Man in Black says no, they're still dishonest people, and this whole thing is a game that they're playing to prove each other wrong. But our best people, I guess, are never, the only way that they're proven to be good people is by sacrificing themselves for the island, which is a vague thing that they didn't even really understand what it was as they were sacrificing itself, right?
Yeah.
The only good deed shown in the story is self-sacrifice, from what I gather.
Yeah. I can't think of counterexamples. That doesn't mean there aren't any, but like, it definitely is a recurring theme that they seem to emphasize self-sacrifice. It's funny because, you know, I think I'm mentally debating. Chad has given me something interesting to think about, which is like, you know, the fact that the Man in Black and Jacob were introduced so late. It's almost like if I pretend that didn't happen, like if I go back and I take like the first 2 or 3 seasons, maybe even the first 1 season, like I think every person who watched that show after the first season had their own like image of what the show was about in their head and what they thought was going to happen. Mm-hmm. And of course, everyone was completely wrong. I would almost argue that practically anyone watching the show at the end of the first season, their like headcanon mental impression of how the show should end was probably better than how it actually ended, because the first season, or at least the first couple seasons, had like actual thematic consistency as far as I remember. Like they seem to be asking interesting questions about trust and honesty and sacrifice. Sacrifice is a valid thing to talk about. It just becomes confusing when you make it sacrifice for this weird island you don't understand. They just lost their coherence at some point. Yeah, it's interesting because like I did love the show when I started watching it, and it just gradually lost me. And I think that's interesting. They threw in too many other weird things that made you stop caring.
They did, and it was interesting because I was talking to Michael Grubb, who's been on the podcast before. He wanted to be on this one but couldn't make it because he lives in another country. But he was talking, and he remembers the show very fondly, but his memory is focused specifically on the first season, which was really good. I really enjoyed it too. It's a lot more. They definitely had the first season of the show fully planned out from beginning to end, and that shows in the writing. But he remembers it, and he describes the show completely different from what I did, which is this is really just a story where the flashbacks are the main point, the main part, and the selling part of the show, and everything on the island is just something to tie all these flashbacks together, which if you look at the first season, that's almost true because we're still learning all these characters, so the flashbacks play a much bigger role in the story because they're having to introduce these characters and we're slowly learning about their background. But that goes out the window basically after the first season, and the events on the island become the most important part.
I think I agree completely. Like the first season, I legitimately believe at the time was a framing device to tell a series of short stories about these people's lives. And like my implicit assumption was that we were going to get to a point in the show where that person's short story ended, and that the short story's ending may have actually been in the past relative to the plane crash, but it would probably tie in some really poetic way into what was happening on the island because the show was good at that. But I think they ran out of runway, and I mean it's like Chad said, they had to keep making episodes, and in a sense you can't fault them for that. I mean I do fault them.
I do,
but like they can't just kill all the characters because their arcs are done, so they had to make up new arcs.
Yeah, and so speaking of characters, I want to dive into some of the character specifics here. The one thing I wanted to talk about was Jack and Kate, and the interesting story between the two of them. I don't know if either of y'all know this, but Jack was supposed to die in the pilot. He was not supposed to be the main character. That when they find the cockpit of the plane, Jack was supposed to die there, and Kate was supposed to take over as the main character. The network didn't like that, so they made them rewrite it and make Jack the main character. So I think what happened in that is that they had to take all these character traits that they originally were going to give to Kate, and they had to give them back to Jack. And it left Kate kind of empty, because Kate is a character that doesn't really do much in the story. She doesn't really have much of an arc. I mean, and maybe I'm just remembering it wrong, Chad. If you disagree, let me know. But
no, I was going to say, I think probably the two hypothetically main characters, Jack and Kate, they change the least from beginning to end.
Right.
I think you look at, Ben has an amazing arc. I think Locke to a point does.
Sawyer does.
Yeah, Sawyer's huge. He starts off like swaggering Lothario, jerk, and then he ends up, he's got glasses on. He's the like nerdy like husband figure, leading the others towards the end. So it's very strong there. And Jack and Kate, Jack starts off, I'm going to save everyone. I will fix everything. I will save everyone. I will fix everything. We're going to be fine. Finishing the show, I'm going to fix everything.
Right. They define that as his tragic flaw, and they never punish him for it. It's just, I guess technically they do because he dies.
He dies.
But that's self-sacrifice. That's good. Sacrificing yourself for the greater good, the show says, is a good thing. So, he's never punished. He never transforms. His only real arc is he goes from, I don't really believe all this stuff on the island is really happening, to, okay, I believe it now. But that's only because he sees all the crazy stuff. It's not like he just becomes a man that just trusts everything. And it's just that he's seen crazy shit, so now he believes crazy shit.
Yeah, so he hypothetically goes from was it man of science, man of faith, argument he always has with Locke, that he goes to somewhat to a point of accepting predestination versus not. And then also I was looking at Lindelof's filmography for a second, and I'm wondering if he has either a really religious background, because a lot of his writing has a lot of religious undertones the more I look at it.
It does. I'd be interested to look into that. If you break down the Man in Black and Jacob to their simplest elements, it is kind of a god and devil type of thing, especially in the fact that Jacob is a free will. I believe people are good, but I'm going to let them make their own choices, versus the Man in Black, who is, I'm going to be in the stuff manipulating people and trying to get people to do what I want. That's very Bible.
Yeah. That's effectively the story of Job. I guess they're basically betting on which way they'll go.
Right.
Yeah, it is very Old Testament specifically, and I think he's Jewish. I think I remember from his Wikipedia that he had a bar mitzvah, so he at least made it that far through the education in the Old Testament, as we call it, which has all that stuff. It's a particularly Old Testament view of God's role in testing people. Yeah, actually, that's great. The Job is a great thing to point out, because just testing these people in ways that is often quite cruel.
Yeah. So to segue off of that, Locke. Locke has the meanest character arc in the history of narrative.
Yes.
It's so cruel to this character. So if we break down Locke's arc, and if I say anything wrong, you guys correct me, but he's a man who he's paralyzed. He gets this island. He's magically cured. So that kind of cements in him this role of importance. The island gave me back my legs, so I must be important, and I have these important things to do, and I have full faith in that everything's happening for a reason, that there's a plan, and I'm going to fully jump into that. He's rewarded by dying.
By being murdered by someone he trusted. And
he gets suicided by Ben.
Yeah. Let me add that, wasn't he paralyzed in the first place because, somebody manipulated him into stealing his kidney and then pushed him out a window or something?
Absolutely. Yeah. His father did it to
his father. He was repeatedly manipulated by his father, because all he really wanted was someone to love him and something to feel important about, which is why he latched on to this whole idea of the island so much, because he felt important. And the narrative repays that by killing him, not only killing him, but making him the physical embodiment of the big evil, right?
Yeah.
So his importance was kind of reverse importance. It was important for the bad guy.
Yeah.
So he has no arc. Like he doesn't
just
really.
Yeah.
It's so sad. It's so mean. It's like he doesn't ever learn anything. I mean, you could argue, yes, he made the same mistake over because he fully put his faith in something that he shouldn't, and he paid the consequence for it. But you're not telling a story there. You're just like repeating something.
I mean, it's interesting because I remember watching the scene where Ben kills him and being like in a state of like between disbelief and just like feeling ill, because I'm just like, why are you doing this to me, show? Like this can't you can't actually be doing this. There must be a trick somewhere. I think maybe Ben thinks there's a trick, but there's not actually a trick. The trick is on Ben, if there was one.
Right.
I forget the details.
So we learn that he's dead, and actually we hear that he killed himself. He got off the island and he tried to get everyone to go back to the island, and when they didn't do that, he got depressed and killed himself. Uh-huh. We later learn that no, he was actually murdered by Ben, and then they take his corpse back to the island, and he seems to have magically been revived. So we're like, okay, finally, this character is going to get some closure. Mm-hmm. And then that's when the reveal is, no, that's not actually John Locke. That's the Man in Black as him, and he's just dead and never resolved, and that's awful.
It seemed like he was going to be at least like one of the top 3 important characters in the show,
right?
In the beginning.
It's just so mean.
They definitely used him in the writing it to move the kind of pacing along. Like if they needed to, now he would say things like, "We have to get to this point next." He was always the kind of instigator of the big changes in the show in general.
Right.
If it was,
yeah, I mean, he was the one pushing for them to open the hatch, which, okay, I'm segueing, but the hatch storyline had nothing to do with the main premise of the show at all, and they talked about it for an entire season.
Talking about Desmond?
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
I mean, the show.
Can you explain? Maybe there's an answer to this. Is there a reason why an automated system couldn't have done what Desmond was doing?
I mean, no, but it's a magical island.
Okay.
So.
Yeah.
But
my strongest defense is it's a magical island.
What does the button and that station and people having to push a button every 108 minutes and the station eventually being exploded, what does that have to do with the conflict between Jacob and the Man in Black and the testing of the candidates?
I mean, that makes no sense, but it's just like why is there a giant wheel underneath a mountain that causes it to bounce around in time? Like that's.
Well, exactly. Like none of this ties. It doesn't. It's independent thing, and it doesn't tie to the overall narrative or theme. Like because
the overall theme is it's a magical island, Scott.
That's not a theme.
No, there's none there. I mean, I liked that entire story. I liked Desmond's character. I really like.
I love
go
Desmond.
Back to his past. Like C. Clancy Brown, one of the great character actors, and interjecting him into the show. Does it make sense that you have to push a button and put in a sequence every 117 minutes? Something
108 something.
108. I mean, no, doesn't really make sense. I wouldn't understand.
Well, and I get what it's doing. I mean, it's tying into the whole faith thing, right? You don't really know what's going to happen if you don't push these buttons, but you believe that you're doing something important, so you're doing it anyway. But that doesn't have anything to do with any other part of the story. Like, it's this micro story that doesn't tie in at all. And that would be fine in a show that doesn't make it seem like we're propelling things forward to some dramatic end.
Yeah. It's interesting, like, it would be interesting to sort of diagram out how many of these problems are just due to the fact that they had to fill time, I guess. Like, that they have to have this many episodes in a season, and they have some ideas for how to take the character drama, and so they just say, okay, here's the framing device, and they run out of I've said it like 3 times so far, but they just run out of leeway for connecting things together.
Right.
It's funny like how good they are at actually concluding many of the characters' arcs. Definitely not all of them, but many of them. But they consistently fail to conclude what I would call like the setting arcs. I don't know if that makes sense. The overall arcs.
It does, yeah. So I guess the thing to draw out here is this type of storytelling hadn't really been attempted before. So like serialized shows were just getting big around the time, like the modern version of the serialized show was kind of just getting big around this time. But most serialized shows still told a complete story from one season. Like from season 1 was a complete story. Season 1 had its own independent theme, and season 2 tied into it kind of, but it still could be viewed on its own. A good example of that is one of my favorite shows, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which each season has its own theme, has its own big bad guy, and that particular plot line is resolved by the end of the season, and then they move on with something else with the same characters in the same world that kind of ties into an overall theme. Lost didn't have any of that. So Lost, I think, tried to do that. Like, I think if you look at season 2 as a whole, the button-pushing season, it's this whole man of science versus man of faith theme. But that's never concluded. It's just carried on. No mysteries are solved related to that theme, and it's supposed to tie into this whole thing that, like, so we were kind of promised that every independent theme within each season would tie together neatly into the overall mystery of the show, right? Mm-hmm. That didn't happen.
Yeah. It reminds me of a soap opera. And I don't necessarily mean that entirely in a derogatory way. It's just that, like, you see a lot of the same things happening in soap operas, and it's because the format is the same. Like, they just have to keep making episodes, and they have to keep making the characters do dramatic things.
Right.
The Lost writers are actually a lot better at making those dramatic things interesting than the writers on any random soap opera. But they're still handcuffed by the format that they just have to keep the ball rolling no matter what, even if it's like, okay, maybe we should wrap this to a close. Like, you're not going to get a novel out of a 6-season television show with like a nice 5-act structure and
right.
and nice, like, concise climax. It's going to be a totally different thing. And I mean, I guess maybe part of my problem and part of why I hate it is, like, part of my brain really does think that, like, you know, a 5-act structure is the way everything should be, and anything that isn't that is bad. And it's like, well, that's probably not a fair perspective.
Well, I mean, Shakespeare did it, and he was pretty smart.
Yeah, he was. So I hear.
Yeah, so I mean, this is all to say, touching on, I'm going to say good things about Lost real quick because I feel like I've been really mean. This is.
I would say you're just being elitist.
That's fair. It's still a fun show to watch, is the crazy thing. I think the way, Matt, you and I did it, which is to kind of read the plot summaries, actually helps you separate it and analyze it independent of the presentation, because the presentation is so good that you kind of lose yourself in it and don't realize that the stuff that's happening around you doesn't make any sense and isn't good storytelling. But like you said, it's shot so well, the performances are so well done, the dialogue is a lot of times written really well. It has these set piece moments that are really well done. I mean, Charlie's death, I watched that scene in particular today because I wanted to rewatch that, because I remember it being this big, powerful moment. And even knowing that him sacrificing himself so they could contact this boat that didn't really matter to the entire plot line in any real sense or way, even knowing that, the scene itself still has so much weight and, like, drama, and it's still really good, and it's really sad. So, I mean, I think doing it the way we did it, where we read about it instead of going through and rewatching it all, allowed me to see the problems a lot more clearly.
Mm-hmm. And maybe also allow you to see what was good about it more clearly. I mean, I think this conversation has sort of reminded me of the parts that were good, actually, because you can separate it. You can say like, okay, this part was bad, but this part was good.
Yeah, it's also tough to overstate how strong Michael Giacchino's score was. I mean, the music on it is amazing. Like, yeah, it's consistently good.
It's because I noticed that in watching it that, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot more songs than I felt like there were. It feels like there were only 5 big scores, but they're so good that even though they've used them 100 times, it still works so well. Like, you're exactly right that like the music is so diverse and able to work over multiple different scenes. I think some of the music that I heard in the pilot, I heard in the last episode exactly, and it still had the same effect on me. So that's a very good point.
Yeah, it's one of the songs from the first episode plays when Winston lays down next to Jack as he's dying. I was like, that's moment number 3 on When I Wept. So
I was just kind of happy Jack was dead because I was bored of him.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm just a heartless bastard.
He definitely wore thin by the end. He really had. He did, because he wasn't a particularly charming character. Like, he's very like alpha male, hard charging. Like, there's a lot of things you respect about him, but you don't really like him. Like, he's not particularly likable. Right,
well, because he never seemed to learn from his faults, right? I mean, the reason you like Sawyer is because he seems like this asshole guy that you eventually find the reason why he is the way he is, and you see him change, so you like him. Mm-hmm. That doesn't happen with Jack.
No.
All right, Matt, does anyone have anything specifically they wanted to make sure to mention? So I guess that's a good idea. Matt, to someone who has never seen this show before, would you recommend them sitting down and watching 90 hours of television to see this?
No, you know what? I would recommend that they watch like maybe the Desmond Becomes Unstuck in Time episode, because that one serves as like a nice little science fiction short story that can almost stand on its own if you sort of gloss over the fact that obviously the lead into the story is, part of the main story. And that's a very effective episode. And there's probably other episodes that I can't name off the top of my head that were really good, like standalone, dramatic stories. But like, I tried to watch this show. I think I tried to binge like season 5, and I just wished that I had like a fast forward button, because I just wanted it to be over. And when I was watching Breaking Bad, I wanted a slow down button, because I wanted to like savor every moment of like what's happening to these characters, because I cared so much. My point is, like, some of the episodes and some of the seasons are orders of magnitude better than the others. And so, no, I wouldn't ask someone to watch it, because then that would mean they'd have to watch the whole thing, and it just completely turns to crap by the end. So it's got good things. I'd recommend a few episodes. That's my bullet points.
Okay. Chad, same question.
I would strongly recommend it, assuming they have the free time, because it's a lot. It's a lot of TV.
Yeah,
it really is. Like my wife she actually didn't finish it somehow. She stopped after season 3, which might make sense to a lot of people. So probably 3 years later, we watched it on Netflix, and I think we knocked it out in probably a month. But I think it held up to me to a point. But I guess I have very fond memories of it, which I guess initial watching may have affect how it imprinted on my brain. So rewatching, I still really enjoyed it.
Yeah. See, I remember loving it, but by season 4 or 5, I was just kind of ready for it to be over. I remember when they announced season 6 was going to be the last season, I was like, good, this needs to end. And that's not, to me, that's not a way a TV show should go out. Like not to keep comparing it to Breaking Bad, but when they announced Breaking Bad was going to end, I was like, man, like, I don't want it to end, but it ended so well. Like, a show should end ideally at its peak when you want more, but you don't get more, versus the other way around.
Well, would you recommend it, Scott?
So, I don't know. So, I've tried to rewatch this show twice before. I get to about midway through the third season, and I end up just giving up because I just get bored. I would say that if someone's never seen any of this and really wants to watch it, I would say watch the first season and then see how you feel. And if you still want to keep going. But as soon as you feel your interests start to wane, just stop, because it's not worth it past there. It's the questions that you have, I can promise you, are not going to be answered sufficiently. The things that you think they're going to tie together, they're not going to tie together, or they'll do it in the most, the easiest, least interesting way possible. So yeah, I mean, I would, if you have the time, start with the first season, give it a try, but don't expect a lot.
Yeah.
All right, we are way over, but that's okay, because I think that was a really good conversation.
Yeah.
I think everyone got their opinion out there. Does anyone have anything else they want to say? Any closing remarks?
I was just going to say, I think my opinion may have actually shifted a tiny bit over the course of this conversation in the favorable direction. So that's all.
Yeah, I definitely. I never like discussing things I don't like, because then I see a lot more flaws. It makes me like them less. Scott has definitely shifted my opinion of Interstellar down somewhat.
Yes. I want to shift everybody's opinion of Interstellar down.
No, I mean, I think it's tough to compare it to Breaking Bad, because Breaking Bad's so very tight, smaller cast, and arguably the best run of television ever. But every point is valid. It was too long. I wish you could get Lindelof on the phone and say, at what point in season 2 or 3 did you figure out that we have a general idea of when it's going to end, or was that in season 3 or 4, and then it was we have to find an extra 60 episodes to get us there.
And the thing that upsets me is people ask them after the first season if they had a plan, and they answered yes. And I guess in retrospect, what are they going to say? Are they going to say no? I mean, they have to answer yes to that question. But it was very obvious that no, they didn't.
I think they had a plan in the same sense that, like, I have like 50 different story ideas in my head at any given time.
Yeah,
I could call them a plan. I could call them that wouldn't be. It's not true.
I think the plan may have been, we're going to keep ad sales really high on Wednesdays for as long as possible.
Yep, that's true.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so that's Lost. So based on our arguments, you can decide which of our advice to take if you've never seen the show. If you have seen the show and don't agree with what we said or want to defend it, you can comment on our website. We have a post up. We put this podcast on, so feel free to comment and tell us how all wrong or right we are. We love the discussion. We'd love to talk with y'all about it. But I think we're going to call this here. Chad, thanks for coming on. Appreciate your input.
Very welcome.
I hope I didn't ruin the show for you, or Matt didn't.
No, I actually am probably gonna rewatch it now, just to see. Begrudgingly admit you're right, or come back with a renewed fervor.
Yeah, you should just write like a 2-page article after you finish it. Here's the reasons you were wrong.
But we'll wait for that in about a year.
All right, so Chad, is there somewhere people can find you online? Do you want them to find you, or do you want to remain a mystery?
That's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll remain a mystery.
Matt, how about you?
I'm on Twitter at MORIDINAMAEL, and I'll also be in the description. And I write articles on dailyplanetfilms.com, DALLY.
Matt, how do you pronounce that Twitter handle?
I don't know. I pronounce it more than a male.
Okay.
But no one ever pronounces it.
That's the most amount of syllables I've ever heard.
Well, is what happens when you choose your like dominant internet handle when you're like 14, based on fantasy novels that you're reading, and then you just end up stuck with it.
Yeah, I don't want to admit what some of my younger handles were. But you can find me at Scott Daly 85. That's Daly. You can also find information about the latest posts at Daily Planet Films, or you can just go log on to our website, www.dailyplanetfilms.com. We post almost every day. We're trying to do 5 days a week. Sometimes we miss that. Sometimes we do a little more. But another thing I want to talk about real quick is the Daily Planet Book Club. We announced our schedule for our first book, Wool, yesterday. For us, it'll be Monday for the people listening to this. So we have our schedule set. There's still time to get the book and read along. We've got, I think, 2 weeks until the first section is due, and then Matt and I and a guest are going to record our podcast and hopefully have some great discussion questions submitted by you guys to talk about. So check that post out. We'll put the link to that in our show notes as well, so you can check that out. There's also a link in there to buy the book on Amazon if you would like to do that. If you are going to buy it on Amazon, please do it through our link to help support us. Some of this stuff costs money, so any support you guys can provide would be great. But I guess that's all we had this week. Matt, thanks again. Chad, thank you for your time, and we'll see y'all next week.